Hey guys, in this video we are going to discuss and analyze the poem Spring, written by Gerard Hopkins. I advise you to have a copy of the poem close at hand and to make notes as we systematically work through the poem. Let's have a quick look at the poet before we analyze the poem. Remember, you do not need an in-depth knowledge of the poet, since they will never ask you questions like when was he born or how many siblings he had. But the upbringing, his values and beliefs all influence the poet and the type of poems he writes. Therefore, it is important to know at least something about the poet. Hopkins is one of the most important poets of the Victorian era. Gerard Hopkins was born on 28 July 1844 and died on 8 June 1889. He was born in Stratford and was the first of 9 children. He was a priest who was never married. He attended grammar school in Highgate, England from 1854 to 1863 and went to college from 1863 to 1867. He mainly wrote about nature and its close connection to God. His poetry only exists today because his friend, poet Robert Bridge, published it in 1918, 29 years after his death. He wrote Spring in May 1877, after walking in the beautiful Welsh countryside. Now that we know a bit more about the poet, let's read the poem. Spring. Nothing is so beautiful as spring, when weeds in wheels shoot long and lovely and lush. Thrush eggs look little low heavens, and thrust through the echoing timber does a rinse and ring the ear. It strikes like lightnings to hear him sing. The glassy pear tree leaves and blooms, they brush the descending blue. That blue is all in a rush, with richness, the racing lambs to have fair their fling. What is all this juice and all this joy? A strain of the earth's sweet being, in the beginning in Eden garden. Have get before it cloy, before it cloud, Christ Lord, and sour with sinning. Innocent man and Mayday in girl and boy, most, O maid's child, thy choice and worthy the winning. Who is the speaker in this poem? The speaker is Hopkins, the poet. As already stated, he was out walking in the Welsh countryside when he had a powerful spiritual experience. Hopkins was a priest. This sonnet is almost like a sermon. He uses first-person narration. The point of view is therefore very intimate and personal. However, by not specifically referring to I in the poem, it is not about a single personal experience, but makes it about a broader relationship between mankind and nature. What type of poem is this? This is a praise poem. He praises the beauty of nature in spring and celebrates the energy and color of the natural world. It is important to note the structure of the poem. This is an Italian sonnet consisting of 14 lines divided into an octet and sestet. The octet, the first 8 lines of the poem, is descriptive and focuses on nature and the poet's appreciation through a variety of images and details. The sestet, the last 6 lines, is reflective and focuses on how God's perfect beauty is reflected by looking at the physical landscape and wonderful nature. This describes the spiritual significance or meaning of the physical images. The breaks between stanzas reflect the turns or breaks in thought. The end of line rhyme or rhythm pattern is A B B A A B B A, C D C D C D. There are only 3 different ending sounds in the entire poem. This makes the poem very musical. Apart from the rhyme, Hopkins also used a type of rhythm called sprung rhythm because his work did not follow the ordinary rhythm of iambic pentameter. Sprung rhythm allows him to pack stressed syllables together to focus our attention on the point he is making. The octave describes the beauty of spring. It describes weeds, thrush eggs, thrush song, leaves and flowers of a pear tree, the rich blue color of the sky, and carousing lambs as beautiful. On the other hand, the sestet reflect upon the beauty of nature. For Hopkins, nature in springtime reflects paradise because to him it is a perfect creation. It represents harmony between man and God. It reflects innocence or purity when man was free from guilt and sin, and is the beginning of new, pure life, just like childhood. The tone of the poem. The octave and sestet form striking contrast. In the octave, the tone is positively joyous, enthusiastic, and full of celebration. This is emphasized by Hopkins' words in line 1. Nothing is so beautiful as spring. In short, the tone in line 1 to 8 is certainty, happy, joyful, energetic, and celebratory. In line 9 to 12, the tone is questioning, urgent, anxious, and regret. Line 13 to 14 becomes pleading. To break it down even further, the sestet has a tone of warning, urgent and anxious in lines 11 to 12, questioning in line 9, pleading in line 11, full of regret in line 12, and even prayerful in line 14. He wants us to understand that the real physical landscape also has an emotional, spiritual side to it. He wishes that people could understand and enjoy the perfect miracles of nature. Instead, we usually spoil things by behaving badly. Hopkins says we will sin, and the hope and optimism of spring will disappear. How about that title? Spring. For Hopkins, spring is like when God created the world. He imagines it was a hopeful, innocent time. There was no harm or pain in the world. He wishes that everyone, not just he, could appreciate the freshness, hope, and optimism of spring. Spring is a time of rebirth and renewal in nature. It symbolizes growth in nature. It is the season of rebirth and renewal of the natural world, a celebration of life. It also symbolizes human revitalization. It reminds us of the original relationship and harmony between man, nature, and God. Spring also refers to the resurrection of Christ. Easter is celebrated when it is spring in the northern hemisphere. For this speaker, the resurrection is of great importance. However, birth also implies death. Literally, everything that grows during spring will mature and die during winter. Figuratively, everything that is innocent and without sin will eventually become sinful. In short, spring metaphorically refers to the period of youth in your life, a reminder of the original relationship and harmony between man, nature, and God. Themes. There are 4 main themes in this poem: the beauty of spring, man and the natural world, religion, and innocence. You should be able to say a little bit of something about each of these themes. The first theme, awe and amazement, in other words, the beauty of spring. The poet has nothing but praise for the beauty of nature and for the creator of everything, God. He describes the profound effect that the beauty of nature can have on people. Nature's perfect beauty reflects the Garden of Eden in paradise. Man and the natural world. Firstly, Hopkins feels that the poem is a celebration of the energy and colors in the natural world. Nature is unique and special. Hopkins wants us to be spiritually aware of our duties to the planet. We are not just our physical bodies. We also need beauty so we can rest and renew our minds and emotions. We must change our attitudes so we can appreciate all the wonderful things on our planet. We are part of a species that must live peacefully with one another. Secondly, he feels that harmony between man and nature is important. For him, youth is the beginning of human life, just as spring is the beginning of new life in nature. Thirdly, nature can provide a connection between heaven and earth. Religion. To the poet, spring is a time of year that brings mankind closest to the harmony between man, nature, and God that existed in the Garden of Eden. For him, praising nature is praising God, the Creator. He feels that man would not be able to get so close to God without nature. The poem is also a plea to God to protect the world from sin, the one thing that separates us from God. And finally, innocence. The memory of paradise and man's removal from Eden introduces despair, fear for the future, and the source of tension in the poem, because maturity spoils childhood innocence. Images that represent innocence, spring, lambs, children, will all mature, which implies that he knows that the loss of innocence is inevitable. Hopkins admires and loves the animal and plant world. It is innocent, harmless, and free from guilt and sin. He thinks that humans are the opposite. We are not innocent because we deliberately disrupt and destroy these peaceful, productive cycles. Hopkins would like humans to be as innocent, well-behaved, kind, and loving as lambs. But he expects us to make this lovely, clean, new world of spring cloudy with our sin. We will ruin it because that is human nature. That sums up the themes in short. Let's have a quick look at some of the sound devices and their functions in the poem. Hopkins makes use of 3 main sound devices throughout the poem: enjambment, alliteration, and assonance. Enjambment. This is known as run-on lines. Throughout the poem, this is used to increase the pace or energy, which suggests growth and quick renewal. Alliteration. Alliteration is easy lyrical flowing consonants at the beginning of words. We find examples of this in line 2. Wheat and wheels and shoot long and lovely and lush. Note how the W and L sounds are musical and add to the feeling of energy. The L alliteration also helps us to imagine tall and thick plants as they grow faster in spring. There is an abundance of weeds and everything is growing energetically and well. Other examples are that blue is all in a rush with riches in lines 7 to 8. Note how the repeated R deepens the meaning. Juice and all this joy, line 9. Look little low heavens, line 3. And like lightnings, line 5. Assonance. Pleasant vowels in the middle of words. For example, a strain of the earth's sweet being in the beginning, in line 10. The assonance emphasizes the repetition of the long and musical E sound. The sounds make us feel Hopkins' yearning or longing for the lovely time that was once paradise on earth. The use of assonance and consonancy also contribute to the musical effect of the poem. Let's quickly look at the meaning of a few words used in this poem. There might be more words with meanings you do not know. I have picked what I think are the most obvious ones. List the words that you don't know in the comments and I will explain them to you as well. First word, lush, growing luxuriantly. Thrush, a thrush is a songbird. Timber, the trees growing in the woods. Ring, to twist or squeeze. The bird's song is so loud and clear that it seems to pierce human ears and makes us pay attention. Strain, a small piece or trace of something. Hopkins means spring is a small imitation of what the paradise of Eden must have been like. No one really knows. Cloy, to sicken with an excess of sweetness. Hopkins is telling his readers to enjoy innocent, natural, earthly beauty because they will soon get tired and bored with it. They will take it for granted. Fling. A fling is a quick, energetic dance. Hopkins means that the lambs are bouncing round with lots of energy, as if they are dancing with joy. May Day, the 1st of May, beginning of spring in the Northern Hemisphere. As we celebrate the beginning of spring on the 1st of September, they celebrate the beginning of spring on the 1st of May. But it can also represent innocence of childhood. Maids, the Virgin Marys. Maid's child, Jesus, child of the Virgin Mary. Now we are going to begin with a line-by-line analysis of the poem. Line 1. Nothing is so beautiful as spring. The poet begins with a statement. He begins by saying, nothing is so beautiful. This is an example of hyperbole. The speaker is convinced that nothing can compare to the beauty of spring. This captures his ecstasy at the beauty and energy of spring. Hopkins uses alliteration and eternal rhyme to emphasize the beauty of spring. This is also a simile. Nothing can be compared to the beauty of spring. We note that spring calls to mind associations to do with rebirth and renewal. The title spring is repeated in the first line to prove its importance. The dash indicates that an explanation follows. He will now give examples of why he thinks spring is beautiful. With the dash, the poet seems to be saying, you don't believe me? Check this out. Best not to write it like that in your question paper. Line 2. When weeds and wheels shoot long and lovely and lush. Even weeds are celebrated here as being beautiful, whereas they are normally unwelcome in a garden. You don't want a garden full of weeds, yet he says the weeds are beautiful. Weeds are natural, while wheels are man-made. The weeds are growing through the spokes of the wheels. This shows a sense of harmony between man and nature. The words wheels and shoot give a sense of energy. Wheels can literally mean wagon wheels or the round form of certain weeds, and figuratively, the cycle of the seasons. Linking the weeds to the wheels gives the idea of weeds having movement and freedom. The suggestion of weeds having movement is emphasized by the L words, where they are not only long and free-growing, but they have beauty added to them through the word lovely. Here is a picture of weeds growing in a wagon wheel. The word shoot reminds one of sprouting plants. This emphasizes the richness of nature exploding into growth. It is easy to imagine the scene as the bleakness of winter gives way to the greenness and growth of spring. The use of alliteration and assonance emphasizes the energetic growth of plants during springtime. The word lush refers to extreme abundance, often experienced during spring. Line 3. Thrush eggs look little low heavens. A thrush is a songbird. The eggs look like little heavens because they are blue and speckled, like the blue sky is dotted with clouds. By leaving out the like in the comparison, the speaker reduces the distance between the egg and heaven. This creates a feeling of heaven on earth. Nature is connected to God, and this reminds us that the beauty of nature is God's creation. In this line, we see the repetition of the consonant L. This is called L alliteration. As already stated, the thrush is a type of bird. The eggs of the thrush look like little heavens, therefore it is a simile. Heavens can either refer to the blue sky or to the place where God is found. The word heaven introduces a religious tone. At the end of the line, the word thrush is used as a verb. It describes the sound of the bird's song. This line continues into the next without a pause. This is therefore an example of enjambment. Line 4. Through the echoing timber. Note the enjambment that began in line 3. It creates a sense of energy because it speeds up the pace. The thrust song echoes through the woods and has a cleansing effect. Echoing timber is a metaphor. It is as if the trees echo with the sound of the thrust voice. The thrust song echoes through the wood, not the timber. Final wordplay can be found in the word timber. Timber means trees, but timbre is a reverberating sound. These two words sound very much alike. The meaning of timber, wood or trees. Rinse and wring are actions performed while washing a garment. We are reminded that spiritual cleansing or rebirth brings man closer to heaven. So, the sound rinses the mind of the winter memories and rings the ear, by extension, the listener. Line 5. The ear it strikes like lightnings to hear him sing. The use of the word like in this line indicates to us that it is a simile. The sound of the thrust song is compared to lightning that strikes. It emphasizes that the sound of the bird's song is powerful and loud, like the sound of lightning. Thus, the sound is striking and ear-splitting, almost as if it can be felt like a lightning strike. The use of lightnings rather than lightning gives a feeling of many lightning strikes and makes it all the more overwhelming. Line 6. The glassy pear tree, leaves and blooms. Glassy. The white flowers and shiny new leaves glister in the sun, creating the impression that the pear tree are made of glass. Glass is fragile, just like this innocence betrayed by spring. Glassy could also refer to a coat of ice on the tree at the end of winter and the beginning of spring. Or it could just describe the drabness and bareness of the tree before the leaves and blossoms arrive. Note that grows have been left out, and pear and tree, which are normally written as two words, are combined to create the sense of rushing along. This is further emphasized by the fact that there are no full stops in the whole octave. The pear tree grows leaves, and then its flowers bloom. It seems as if one is watching spring in fast-forward mode. This can also be seen as a metaphor. The pear tree, full of white flowers, resembles an ice-covered tree. Since it is spring, there is no real ice on the tree. It only appears to be full of ice because of the white blossoms. The pear trees reach high up in the sky, giving us probably one of my favorite metaphors that actually continues into line 7. Hopkins is saying that the white blossoms covered leaves of the pear tree slowly moves from side to side as the breeze moves them. This creates an image of a paintbrush which is painting the sky blue. Have you ever seen a pear tree in bloom? Here is a picture for you. What a beautiful tree. Don't you agree? Line 7. The descending blue, that blue is all in a rush. The word descending means coming down from earth. This links with low in line 3 and reinforces the idea that spring is like heaven on earth. The blue personifies the sky. All in a rush proves that the sky cannot hurry down fast enough to share its beautiful gift, richness, here on earth. As noted in the previous slide, the word brush from line 6 also brings to mind a paintbrush. The image is continued into line 7. Our speaker is, after all, painting this scene for us. The poet is also talking about creation, and he seems to compare the earth to a work of art. By making that comparison, there's an unspoken suggestion that there is an artist, God, who did the painting or creating. The use of the word rush at the end of the line captures the unstoppable energy of the season, spring. Line 8. With riches, the racing lambs too have fared their fling. Up until now, everything has been vibrant, full, and rushing forward in abundance. In line 7, the poet talks about the blue that is in a rush. He continues to describe the blue sky in line 8 by saying, with richness. It seems as if the blue sky is overpowering everything. It seems to link with the explosion of beauty described in the previous line. The racing lambs creates a picture of lambs playfully leaping and playing. Lambs have always been associated with innocence. Christ is described as the Lamb of God because he is free of sin, innocent. The association is that spring represents an innocent state, like that experienced in the Garden of Eden. This is the closest we can get to God. The alliteration of the R sound. The repeated R deepens the meaning. The F alliteration emphasizes the lambs rushing about excitedly. Abundant joy is betrayed by the lambs. Fling means jumping around. This line has an energetic and happy tone. This concludes the discussion of the first 8 lines, the octave. Now we note a break. The first stanza describes the beauty of nature. This is now changed and becomes reflective, describing the religious meaning of the physical images. Let's look at the sestet. Line 9. What is all this juice and all this joy? This almost seems like the first line of the poem, in that it appears to be laying out a theme for the lines that follow. In line 9, the poet asks a rhetorical question. This slows down the reader to think about all the joys of spring. The question seems to be, what is the real meaning that lies behind the happiness and beauty of nature in springtime? Hopkins finds that nature's beauty reflects God's perfect beauty. The word juice can be interpreted literally and figuratively. Literally, it refers to the lushness, overabundance. Figuratively, it refers to the essence of something pure and uncorrupted. In this, there is a warning. There is the underlying concern that the world is not always like this spring scene. We all know that after spring comes winter. Innocent children grow up and they lose their innocence. Lines 10 to 11. A strain of the earth's sweet being in the beginning in Eden garden have get before it cloy. Strain. Although spring is so perfect, it is only an insufficient imitation or reminder of what the Garden of Eden must have been like. The beginning refers to the story of Adam and Eve where there was no sin. Eden was bountiful, the ultimate spring. This is a biblical allusion. It alludes to the first verse in the Bible. The reference to strain can also be seen as a metaphor. Spring is a small reflection of the Garden of Eden, and strain refers to something that is repeated in music. Spring is a musical echo of the perfection of the Garden of Eden. Spring gives us an idea of what the Garden of Eden must have been like before sin. It symbolizes innocence and perfection. According to Hopkins, spring is all that is left of the purity of the Garden of Eden. After the dash, he starts to say a prayer. He prays God will preserve beauty before it loses its wholesomeness or purity. People should enjoy, get the innocent, natural, earthly beauty of spring, because the season will soon change, and then the beauty of spring will disappear. Cloy, to sicken with an excess of sweetness, as already explained. The tone of this line is urgent and pleading. Line 12. Before it cloud, Christ, Lord, and sour with sinning. Cloud means to make dirty, darker, or to confuse. Our sins make the beauty of spring murky, dirty, because we cannot focus on nature as God intended us to do. When we address someone directly in poetry, speak to them as if in person, it is called an apostrophe. Christ Lord proves the speaker is a Christian, and the poem begins to sound like a prayer. He speaks directly to God. The S alliteration emphasizes the effect of sin. Sour is in contrast with sweet, used in line 10, which indicates the loss of purity. Literally, sour means fruit becoming overripe and decaying. This suggests a loss of innocence. Figuratively, it refers to eating the forbidden fruit, in other words, sinning. Sinning refers to the original sin in the Garden of Eden that polluted and negatively influenced the world. Hopkins feels despair at the way maturity spoils childhood innocence. The jumbled word order emphasizes the emotional turmoil. A sense of anguish has entered the poem. This is reflected by the repetition and rephrasing of the hard C sounds. He expresses a wish to shelter the beauty and innocence of childhood from sin. Line 13. Innocent mind and Mayday in girl and boy. Hopkins identifies the aspect of beauty he most wishes to see preserved, childhood innocence. The speaker is asking Christ to save the innocent from sin, especially the innocent minds of children. The tone now has a sense of urgency and pleading. However, there is the underlying knowledge that it's going to happen anyway. Maturing, sinning is part of human nature. Mayday refers to young children who are innocent. It is also the beginning of spring, where we are reminded of the growth that lies ahead. He asks God to preserve the purity or the innocence, the Mayday, by saving them from sin. They are the best of God's creation. They are therefore worth Christ's effort. Line 14, the last line of the poem. Most, O maid's child, thy choice and worthy the winning. Most and choice. The children are the best, the pick of the crop. They are worth the effort it would take Christ to win them and preserve their innocence forever. Maid's child refers to Jesus, born of the Virgin Mary. This is also an apostrophe. The speaker is addressing Jesus directly. Choice. Definitely bringing up a lot of questions and possibilities. What does it mean that it is God's choice to have or to allow sin? The word choice also might bring up the idea of free will. And maybe that is the answer to this question. In order to allow free will, God has to allow sin. Be as it may, Hopkins' prayer acknowledges that the power is in God's hand. A quick summary of this line. Hopkins says, Jesus, it's up to you. Won't you win over these innocent children, because you are Almighty and the only one who can save them from sin? This prayer is unusual. Usually, people ask God to save them after they have sinned. This acknowledges that the power or the choice is in the hands of God. The poem has definitely turned into a prayer. That concludes our line-by-line analysis of the poem. Remember, each poem tells a story. Make sure you understand the story each poem tells. Before I go, let's have a quick look at the language devices used in the poem. Comparisons and similes. The eggs of a thrush are compared to the speckled cloud-patterned sky. The song of the thrush is compared to lightning because it's sharp and piercing. Metaphors. Springtime is compared to the Garden of Eden because it is a perfect creation. The pear tree in the distance is compared to a paintbrush coloring the sky. Contrast, sinning versus innocence. The joyful octave praising nature versus the anxious sextet worrying about sin and praying to God. Symbolism. Birds remind us that there is a life away from earth, heaven. Trees show the effect of time and make an area even more beautiful. Spring is a reminder of paradise, the Garden of Eden. That is the end of this video. If you need any more help, please do not hesitate to ask. Cheers, guys.